Welcome to That Anita Live, the talk show dedicated to providing emotional healing through sharing to help you create a happier life. I'm Anita, your host, and we're about to get down to the business of fear and anxiety. There is a doctor in the building, and she is here to teach us why, what, and how it forms. How it forms, why we stay stuck in it, and what we can do to get moving forward again. Dr. Alicia earned a Masters in Counseling Psychology from Bowie State University. Says she don't know nothing about that band over there, but we're gonna check on that. And a Masters and Doctorate degree in Clinical Psychology from the University of Hartford. She has over a decade of experience in providing cognitive behavioral therapy across various treatment settings with adolescents and adults. Code, that means she can help you with all your mental and emotional health problems. What's up, Dr. Alicia?
Hi, thank you for having me.
How are you?
Pretty good.
What is fear?
So fear is a response to an object or to a situation. So the most common fear that I can think of is bugs. So for example, if you see a bug, that immediate response to kind of want to avoid it and get away, that would be a perfect example of fear.
What is anxiety?
So anxiety is actually more of a physical experience. So I would say that we all have had anxiety before. Anxiety is actually natural and normal, and it's useful. So a perfect example of that is...
Hold on. Natural, normal, and useful. Did you hear that? Natural, normal, and useful. So that means that when someone has anxiety or an anxiety attack, doesn't mean that they need to be committed to a mental health ward.
No, not at all. So that's an extreme manifestation of anxiety. But we all have had that situation where we're like, oh my gosh, I need to return that phone call, or I need to pay a bill. That's anxiety. It's alerting you to a situation that you need to get moving and going on. Now, when that is kind of out of proportion and a little bit too high, you might get something like a panic attack where you're really having those physical symptoms. You feel like maybe I'm going to have a heart attack, maybe I can't breathe, or I'm going to pass out. And that, of course, if that continues to happen, then that's something that we would sort of classify as an anxiety disorder. Disorder meaning that it's affecting your life and keeping you from doing the things that you need to be able to do. But general low levels of anxiety are okay. But oftentimes it's our reaction to that anxiety, which usually results in avoidance, that starts causing the problems.
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 How do fear and anxiety form?
So ultimately, it's as I mentioned, it's a response to a situation. So usually it's automatic. We have a portion in our brain. So I like to do this. When I think of the brain, if you close your hand like this, this is the front of our head. This would be our ear. This is the part of our brain that results in fear. So it's pretty natural, but it's a really quick response. We don't have time to think about it with the front part of our brain. And it makes us run, it makes us scream, it makes us hide. But ultimately what happens is that if you continue to have a fearful response to something like, I don't know, meetings or talking in front of people like your boss when you need to, then that's when it becomes a problem. And it really requires a lot of work using something like cognitive behavioral therapy to kind of look at, what am I thinking about this? What is my perspective? Am I seeing this as something that I can't overcome?
How would somebody work to get over that?
Yeah.
Say the public speaking. How would somebody work to get over the public speaking?
Really, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it's actually doing it. So exposing yourself to a situation that you're afraid of actually will show you that maybe it's not as bad as you think. Because usually we don't do something because we're like, this is going to be really awful. I'm not going to be able to handle it. I don't know how to do this. So then we don't do it. And that by in and of itself actually teaches us, oh, I shouldn't do these things. I feel better when I don't do them. I don't feel nervous. I don't have to deal with it. So then you start getting comfortable with that. But ultimately, if you actually try it out, you'll maybe hopefully see that it's not as bad as you thought.
Now, why do people, or how do people get to a point that they allow fear to keep them stuck from moving forward in life?
I think it's the same cycle. Sometimes people put a lot of pressure on themselves. So I mean, statistically, women are more often diagnosed with anxiety disorders than men. And I think my thought is that comes from perspective, whereas we believe that we need to make sure that everyone's happy, that we need to look good, that we need to do good. And what happens is that kind of becomes our mindset. So we start to believe, you know what, there are certain things I cannot do. There are certain things that are going to be overwhelming for me. So what happens is you start to avoid them. Avoidance is the biggest maintainer of anxiety. If you decide, I should make that phone call, but I don't really want to, I'm scared, then you feel like, okay, it's just like a Band-Aid. that relief of
Okay.
not doing something.
Now, a
and we
lot
get
of that,
stuck.
a lot of that is self, and
Yes.
where we have to do that self-awareness to be able to be honest with ourselves to say, this is why I'm not doing something.
Yeah.
Now, if I notice that behavior in somebody else,
Yeah, it's a lot easier to see.
how could I handle that?
So what I would say is to comfort them or even empathize to say, like, I know that sounds really hard, you know.
Oh,
have
so
a
I
hard
shouldn't say,
time
get
doing
your
that
butt
too."
out there and
No,
get that.
That does not work at all. It's the same concept of when someone's worked up, when you say calm down, it never helps. So ultimately it's around saying, like, I know that sounds really hard for you, but I wonder what would happen if you just tried it.
That sounds so simple.
It does.
Unfortunately, that is not how we are handling it out here in these
No,
streets.
it's not. I mean, I see that a lot when I work with children and
Okay.
families. So I see children with some anxiety around things like even bedtime, and their parents are just like, go to bed, just go to bed. It's not that serious.
Boy, ain't no boogeyman in that room. Hush up all that noise and get in there and be quiet.
Exactly. But if your
Okay,
child is
okay.
afraid of the closet, think about that example of it when you actually open the closet to show your child there's nothing in there. That's the same idea of trying out something that you're afraid of. If you actually do it, then you'll realize that it's probably not as bad as you thought.
Try it and it's not as bad as you thought. Because I know some people have been through negative experiences
They have.
and formed fears. Just this past week, we had a conversation in my office, and one lady, she's going through a divorce, and says that she will never do it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that fear, or is that
I think that there's some fear there, of course, right? I think that's you protecting yourself and saying, I don't want to go through this situation again.
Okay.
So I think if you do focus on all the negatives of why you got divorced, then more than likely you're not going to get back in another situation because it makes more sense not to.
Okay.
But if you really actually wanted to get in another relationship, then the key would be to focus on the things that you enjoyed about being in a relationship and kind of being open to the idea that the next one could be different.
so she should take it step by step?
Yeah.
And
one
not-
day at a time.
not
Stay in
throw
the
the-
present.
The baby out with the bath water.
Yeah. Don't get ahead of ourselves.
Does anxiety form from fear, or could it be connected to other things?
You know, oftentimes it does. It's usually that association once you feel those fearful feelings. Like we're sort of made that if something bad happens to not repeat that thing again. But that
Better
doesn't
be-
always.
you better believe it.
Right. That's not always realistic. So if I'm afraid of speaking at a meeting, you know, I might not do well that first meeting. But if I have to do it again, I don't really have a choice other than to try it over.
Now, fear has a huge bandwidth because there's fear and then there's phobia.
Yes.
What's the difference?
I would say fear is actually the response. A phobia is usually something very specific, if that makes sense. So you can be afraid of failing, and that's a big general concept. But a phobia might be, I'm afraid of chairs. And that's just something really specific and direct.
And how the way that people work through them, is it the same?
It's very much the same. It's usually through something we call exposure and response therapy. So that's something specific. It's like structured, systematically approaching something that you're afraid of and experiencing it. So in the example I gave before about bugs, if someone said, you know, I'm really afraid of bugs and it's actually impacting my life, I can't go out, I can't go to my family reunion, then I would say, okay, well, let's start small. Tell me the top 10 things about bugs that you're afraid of. The highest thing might be touching the bug. So we'll go through and say, let's look at some pictures of the bug and see how we feel. Let's talk about bugs. Let's go
You're so
outside for a little
patient.
while. Yeah, it takes time
Patient.
because we have to train ourselves to see that it's not as bad as we thought. Because usually we jump to the conclusion of, I'm going to die.
Exactly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Exactly. And that's it and that's all.
Yep.
Which is, I guess that's how we stay stuck.
Yeah.
Because we only concentrate on.
The worst case scenario.
Now, what is cognitive behavioral therapy?
So in a nutshell, cognitive behavioral therapy is the idea that what we think affects how we feel and what we do. So if I thought to
Hold on, hold on.
myself,
What we think is
our thoughts
okay.
affect our feelings and our behaviors. So if I think to myself that coming on here and talking will be the worst thing that's ever going to happen to me and I'm going to be so scared, I probably would feel very nervous and I might not show up. Versus if I thought to myself, this is going to be a great experience, I'm going to have fun, I would be excited and I would come and talk to you like I'm doing right now.
So in the cognitive behavioral therapy, do you put them through situations or?
Yeah.
Really?
So we really monitor thoughts. We look at, you know, what's the worst case scenario? Is that what you're thinking about? Is that what's putting pressure on this situation for you? And then we break down what are some other options? What are some other things that could happen?
Okay.
What are some other ways you might feel? And then we go through it. And then exposure therapy, as I mentioned, is actually like working towards that fear slowly but surely.
So what is the most difficult case you've had thus far?
Oh, that is a good question. I would say, to be honest, people dealing with social anxiety or social phobias are really difficult because people are everywhere and we have to interact with people on a daily basis.
Break that down. Give me an example. What is that? What is a social?
Meaning that they're most afraid of making requests, talking to other people, even saying hello, asking questions because they're afraid that people are going to judge them, maybe think that they sound stupid or they're going to make a mistake. And that's basic, you know, day-to-day communication. So that can be really tough to get someone to just practice saying hi to people at work, which I've done. I've literally walked with somebody around a campus and said, we're going to wave to 5 people. And it was difficult, but once you accomplish it and you succeed, then I say, oh, well, I wonder, was it as bad as you thought?
So what has been the most rewarding?
The most rewarding situation? I would say similarly working with someone who wanted to go to like after-hour parties at work and get-togethers and Christmas parties, kind of getting them to the point where they could do that and make friends at work and interact instead of kind of just going home every day and staying to themselves, because that could be really miserable.
So what made you go into mental health
You know, that's a good question. I think the answer is just that I experienced a lot of situations where, for example, college, we're all in the same situation, but we're all reacting to it so differently. So even exam time, some people falling apart, some people are performing really at a really high level.
Okay.
And I was always interested, like, what's making us so different? So that was kind of the beginning. And I didn't have to do more math when I got to college, so.
Now we get to the truth.
I was like, that's a good major right there.
We'll be right back to discuss fear and anxiety in relation to mass shootings.
What if I told you that you could stop the negative tape from playing inside your head? What if, with 7 simple steps, you could leave the pain of the past behind and live every day as your true, authentic self? It is possible, and you can do it. The ebook, 7 Simple Steps to Beat Emotional Baggage, How to Become Whole, Healed, Healthy, and Happy, shares how to resolve emotional baggage and feel free to live true to your own personality, spirit, and character. Transform negative thinking into positive thinking and become equipped to boldly face your past and resolve emotional pain. Get your free copy at thatanitalive.com/ebook.
And we're back with Dr. Alicia, and we're discussing fear and anxiety. We talked about how it forms and what it is, why we use it to keep us stuck. People use it as excuses. But now let's talk about it from the standpoint of mass shootings. We've had a number of them happen in the United States over the last couple of years. They're becoming more and more common.
Unfortunately, yeah.
With the continuous loops on the media and on social media, how does it, I know kids that are having fear and anxiety about going back to school.
Yeah, absolutely.
The most recent one was in Florida. We're here in DC, but how does that affect?
Well, it affects lots of people, parents and children.
Okay.
I think when you see that, for example, that is a worst case scenario, right? So I did say earlier that sometimes we're imagining the worst case scenario and that's what keeps us fearful or stuck. But that's actually the worst case scenario coming true. So it can be really difficult for people to feel unsafe or feel like, you know, I can't manage this. But I am seeing some children who have that fear of going to school, and we're sort of just discussing, like, what are some ways that you can stay safe? What are some things that you do feel good about? You know, unfortunately, we have to admit the reality that it could happen, but also sort of discussing that there's no guarantee that it'll happen.
Because I know here in the area, even when we had the sniper, from an adult perspective, there was a lot of fear and anxiety in the area.
Yeah. And that's where fear and anxiety are protective, right? So that's what I mentioned earlier, that it's natural and normal. And it's okay to have fear. I think that when something like that is going on in your environment, your body is doing what it needs to do to keep you on alert, to say something is going on and you got to be careful. So you just want to look at, how can I keep this moderate? You know, I want to be on alert, but I also want to realize that I have things that I need to accomplish and unfortunately go back to school. But I think that's also why it's important to have resources. So, you know, in the school, there needs to be school counselors to be able to talk to the kids and help them process their feelings. Or, you know, they could come to somebody like
not locked into standardized testing and giving out medication.
Yeah, yeah. Pay more attention to actually counseling.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Be given the opportunity to actually practice your craft in the school.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, with MASH, I know one lady right now going through an extreme case. And where she's refusing to leave her home.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And this is surprising because it's all of a sudden. It happened.
Yeah.
What could her family do in that case?
For someone who's afraid to leave the house, I think, again, like I mentioned before, like empathizing with them and saying, like, we know the world can be a scary place. And what did you notice when you were going out the house before? You know, were there people lurking around every corner? Did something happen to you then? I mean, perhaps something did, but, you know, really trying to get them to focus on some of the positives and some of the other reasons why they enjoyed leaving the house, and just doing, how about we go in the yard just for 5 minutes? You know, because it will be a dramatic shift to jump from being housebound to the mall, but kind of just thinking, like, why don't we go in the yard and just see what it's like? Why don't we take a ride around the block and then come back home? So just kind of systematic, gradual exposure to the environment.
To parents that have children that have social media accounts, for instance, a lot of the video from the cell phones from the students that were involved in the latest mass shooting are on YouTube.
Yeah, I heard that.
How can parents, I guess, try and mitigate that risk?
I think where it starts is just conversation. So you can't really control everything that your child is doing online. And if you try to, chances are they're just going to hide it and they're not going to show it to you or talk about it. So I think it's important to just open up a conversation to say, like, you know, I heard something's going around online. Like, have you seen it? What did you think about it? That must have been so scary. But just to show that you're there to talk about it and process it versus being like the warden that's here to shut down everything online.
Give me that phone.
Yeah, because ultimately,
turn that TV off.
Right? You're telling them in a way like, I don't want to discuss this. It's just what I say.
Because a lot of the times, people in general, not just children or teenagers, when they go through difficulties, will just shut down and shun themselves off from everyone. As a community, how can we reach out to people that are going through these difficulties?
What if I told you that you could stop the negative tape from playing inside your head? What if, with 7 simple steps, you could leave the pain of the past behind and live every day as your true, authentic self? It is possible, and you can do it. The ebook, 7 Simple Steps to Beat Emotional Baggage, How to Become Whole, Healed, Healthy, and Happy, shares how to resolve emotional baggage and feel free to live true to your own personality, spirit, and character. Transform negative thinking into positive thinking and become equipped to boldly face your past and resolve emotional pain. Get your free copy at thatanitalive.com/ebook.
You know, I think having the conversations that we have, like even the conversation that we're having, just opens up to people to start thinking about different aspects of it. Like, you know what, I hadn't considered that maybe people would be shutting down because they're afraid or shutting down because it's overwhelming. Because sometimes we just take people's behaviors personally. Like, oh, why are they being that way? Or why aren't you doing what I say? When you try to help them out, it's like, oh, you shunning me? Forget it. I don't want to talk to you anymore. When it's more so, maybe you just need to come back one at a time. Or maybe you need to think about it from their perspective and say, you know what, maybe they're just really scared in a way that I'm not scared.
All that sounds very patient and understanding.
It
very
does.
patient
It's my
and understanding.
aspirational goal for
And
everyone.
For those of us that do not have that level of patience and understanding, or if life is just so busy, they don't have that to dedicate to that one specific issue going on in their life. Let's discuss, I'd say, the top 3 ways that people can help others deal with the difficulties in life and not launch into the spectrum of fear and anxiety.
You mean how could someone who's not as patient help someone else out who might be dealing with fear and anxiety? Yeah. So I think the first thing would be to understand that the only way that someone's going to overcome fear and anxiety is to do the things that they're afraid of. Now, it can be hard if you're feeling impatient to kind of slowly work with them, but I think you can even give them that message of, look, I know that this is difficult, but I really encourage you to try, because that's going to be the way that you get better. Now, it's going to be hard, but sometimes people realize that. I mean, I've seen people sort of say, like, here's the information, now you do with it what you want, because then they don't feel so pressured or forced, but it might take longer, in all honesty.
Because what if it's in a work situation? And you know how sometimes the turntable can turn under you?
Yeah.
And where there's a reorg and you are now put into a training position where you have to do presentations versus being someone that could just operate out of your cube and not interact with others on a regular basis. In a work situation, what could a supervisor do? Because I always see them lean towards giving somebody a bad performance appraisal.
Yeah.
And then trying to, you know, play musical chairs with the bad employees in the office. They just try, okay, well, I'll take her for the next 6 months if you take this one.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I would say if you really notice that your employee was having a performance problem, I would say maybe talk to them and just say, like, hey, I see that this is not going well for you. Give me some ideas of how we can support you. At least let them maybe address it and tell you what they're specifically afraid of.
No, I can't talk in front of people. I've never said anything in front of anybody. I didn't even do Easter speeches. I don't want to do it.
I understand you. I hear you. And what are some other ways you can look at this? Because I think it's okay to say, like, your job depends on this. This is important. And also, if this is beyond me as a supervisor, do we have EAP?
Okay.
Can I refer you to EAP to talk to them? Because ultimately they need to practice. So it becomes that risk versus the reward. Like, am I going to take the risk and give the speeches, or am I going to miss out on this job opportunity?
What are some of the biggest risks you've seen some of your clients take and be successful with?
Wow, that's a good question. I've seen people take risks in terms of being afraid of germs. So in theory, right, germs are everywhere, all over the place. So I've seen people be willing to eat things off the floor. And that's a huge risk if you're worried about germs, because even for myself, I don't consider myself a germaphobe, but I wouldn't be inclined to eat something off the floor.
Would.
Yeah. So I would say that was one of the biggest risks, to let people touch their stuff, like a room full of people touch all their items, and just say, like, all the germs are all over it, but that's okay.
That is a risk.
A huge one.
And okay, so
that took time, though.
That's what I'm about to ask.
That took time.
That's my next question.
Even something
about
small.
how long would something like that take, though?
I would say that would take somebody about a minimum of 12 weeks of 12 therapy sessions. So we start off with even looking at stats. How many people die from eating things off the floor? Because sometimes in our mind, when we're afraid of something, we overestimate. So we would say, like, well, 100% of people die from eating off the floor. And I would say, I think you're overestimating a little bit, to get them to the point where it's like, now you eat something off the floor and you see. I mean, obviously the huge risk is to die, but at that point they've kind of realized it's probably not going to happen.
To eat something off the floor.
Because you've conquered it. At that point, it's called overcorrection. If you can do something as extreme as eating something off the floor, then you can open a doorknob.
Eating something. I can't. I'm sorry. Have just a minute. I need a minute to get past that. And this is a floor in their home, a floor in the office.
A floor in the office. So that's the whole point. Like, you're going to eat off this highly trafficked office floor, and you're going to live. Oh, right. But that's your preference, right? You, in this case, like, you're sort of like, ooh, that's gross. I don't want to do it. But it doesn't seem like you would automatically think, like, I cannot do that. I would for sure die. It just would be gross, right?
And therein lies the difference.
The difference between a disorder and just kind of a preference.
Because I know people that do the 5-second rule.
Yeah. They're making room for their beliefs by saying, like, this is gross, but 5 seconds.
Okay. Okay, that's how the good doctor wants to explain it. We'll roll with it like that. Oh my, okay, but back to the mass shootings.
Okay.
Explain to me why adults should not just continuously sit in front of their news media or in front of their phone and watch the loop of the incident unfolding over and over and over
Those
again.
kind of things are really triggering, and I think that they really feed in, they make a belief strong. So the same way if you tell someone over and over that they're great and they start to believe that, those types of footage and clips, sort of when we watch them over and over, we start to believe like this is the only thing that's going on. And it's kind of traumatizing. So I know me personally, when this kind of stuff happens, sometimes I'm a little less informed, I will admit. Sometimes I just don't watch it because I can't really deal with that much exposure to the kind of negative and traumatic footage like that. So I would encourage people to limit their viewing, especially because when we have a belief like the world is a dangerous place, if we follow it up with hours upon hours of footage that show that, then your belief gets stronger.
Now, what about the other extreme? The people that say, don't post it, don't put it out there at all anyway.
Well, I think that's a form of avoidance too, right? Those people may be feeling just as afraid and they're avoiding it, which is probably in some ways what I'm doing too, but I'm telling myself I'm doing it in a healthy way.
Well, I think once you become knowledgeable of it, then you have that knowledge. It's not something that you have to continuously do over and over and over again.
I agree with you.
The desensitization is what worries me.
Yeah, I agree. I think being exposed to that stuff so much, you just start to take it as commonplace, which is unfortunate because that's not the way that we want to know that it's important and it should be paid attention to, but not like, okay, just another shooting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The world we live in today. As of this moment, I command you to never let fear control your future again. One of the ways to combat emotional fear is with knowledge. The more you know, the less you have to be afraid. It becomes easier the more you become comfortable failing forward. Make the commitment to start your journey to emotional healing today. To reach out to Dr. Alicia, you can visit helpmehodge.com. Be sure to check out thatanitalive.com for and when to see our next episode. Bam, that's a wrap. 7:30.